He sold our home for a dog. My ex's downfall exposed. Imagine waking up one day to find out your husband sold your home for a dog's surgery. Sounds insane, right? Well, that was just the beginning of my nightmare. First, he drained our bank account. Then, my so-called best friend, who suddenly developed a terminal illness, had one final wish: to do a wedding photoshoot with my husband. And the worst part? He agreed. But don't worry, I didn't just sit back and cry. Oh no, I walked away, built an empire, and planned the most delicious revenge they never saw coming. And trust me, karma didn't just knock on their door, it kicked it down. Stay with me, because this story has plot twists you won't believe, and I documented everything. Silly story begins. Please like and subscribe. Chapter 1. You know those fairy tales where the princess marries her Prince Charming and lives happily ever after? Well, this isn't one of those stories. This is what happens when Prince Charming turns out to be more of a perfectly polished toad, and the princess decides she's had enough of kissing frogs. I'm Julia Chen, and I had the dubious honor of marrying David Parker, aka the Saint of Silicon Valley. Everyone called him that because he was always helping someone in need. Little old ladies crossing the street? There's David. Stray cats needing homes? David's your guy. Lost tourists looking for directions? David would probably offer to be their personal tour guide for the week. When we met at a charity gala, of course it was a charity gala, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Here was this gorgeous man with perfect teeth, and even more perfect manners, who spent his weekends building houses for the homeless, and teaching coding to underprivileged kids. My mother practically fainted with joy when I brought him home. Julia, she whispered in Mandarin, clutching her chest dramatically, he's like a Asian American mother's bingo card come to life. The wedding was everything you'd expect from marrying Silicon Valley's favorite humanitarian. We had sustainable flower arrangements, donation cards instead of gifts, his idea, and a 5-course vegan menu that made my Uncle Henry cry, and not in a good way. Everyone kept telling me how lucky I was, how perfect we were together, how our children would probably solve world hunger before learning to walk. I should have known something was off when David insisted on handling all our finances to reduce my stress levels. How considerate, right? What a thoughtful husband. That's what I kept telling myself, even when I noticed our joint account seemed mysteriously lower than it should be. It's for charity, he'd say, flashing that $1 million smile that made old ladies want to adopt him and young women want to. Well, you get the idea. But the real wake-up call came 6 months into our marriage. I was away at a conference in Seattle, presenting my research on artificial intelligence ethics. Yes, I'm the nerd in this relationship. David called me, his voice dripping with that special blend of concern and martyrdom I'd come to know so well. Sweetheart, he said, remember how we talked about helping others in need? We hadn't. Well, my colleague James. You remember James, right? His sister's best friend's cousin's neighbor has this dog. I gripped my phone tighter. David, what did you do? I sold our condo. I nearly dropped my phone into my overpriced conference coffee. You did what? The dog needs emergency surgery, he explained, as if that made perfect sense. And you know how passionate I am about animal welfare. Besides, I found us this amazing rental. It's cozy. Cozy in real estate speak usually means you can touch all 4 walls while standing in the middle of the room. But that wasn't even the worst part. Later that night, while stress-eating room service chocolate cake and trying not to hyperventilate, I got a message from my college friend Rachel. Hey, isn't this your wedding registry KitchenAid mixer on eBay? One frantic search later, I discovered that every single one of our wedding gifts had been secretly returned or resold. That copper cookware set my grandmother shipped from Taiwan? Sold. The handmade quilt from my aunt? Gone. The ridiculously expensive coffee maker from my boss? Probably funding someone's dog's rhinoplasty by now. But here's the real kicker. The detail I only noticed after watching our wedding video for the 100th time, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. In every single shot of David helping someone at our reception, fixing a wobbly chair, helping with dropped appetizers, adjusting someone's shawl, the someone was always a stunning woman in her 20s or 30s. The elderly gentleman who actually fell? David was mysteriously absent, probably too busy helping the former Miss California contestant find her lip gloss. I wish I could say this was the moment I left him. But no, this was just the beginning of my descent into the bizarre reality show that my life was about to become. Trust me, it gets worse, much worse, and infinitely more satisfying in the end. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't just living well, it's living well while watching your ex-husband's perfect life implode from your penthouse view. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Chapter 2. They say when you're pregnant, you're eating for two. What they don't tell you is that sometimes you're also living with what feels like 24 people. Let me explain. When my doctor said bed rest, I imagined peaceful days catching up on Netflix, maybe finally writing that AI ethics paper I'd been putting off, or at least enjoying some quiet time before the baby arrived. What I got instead was David's idea of support, which meant inviting his entire extended family to stay with us in our shoebox rental. Picture this: me, hormonal and confined to bed, while Aunt Linda practices her splitting opera in the living room. She's preparing for her big break at age 62. Uncle Pete conducts his morning Tai Chi sessions in our kitchen. Apparently, the energy is better there, and Cousin Jenny's twins use our hallway as a makeshift soccer field. Oh, and let's not forget David's mother, who took it upon herself to heal my pregnancy complications with her special bone broth that smelled like something had died in it. Twice. They're here to help. David would beam, while I lay there wondering if it was possible to develop an allergy to your in-laws. Family is everything. Easy for him to say. He was mysteriously absent most of the time, claiming he was networking for the baby's future. Because apparently, our unborn child needed LinkedIn connections before it even had fingers. But here's where it gets interesting. Remember our building's broken security camera that David never got around to fixing? Well, it wasn't broken at all. One particularly sleepless night, while trying to distract myself from Aunt Linda's midnight vocal exercises, I discovered the camera feed still worked perfectly on our apartment's smart home system. And what did I see? My devoted husband, who was supposedly helping at the homeless shelter, playing golf with a group of Silicon Valley executives, in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, wearing a polo shirt that cost more than our monthly rent. It's for charity. He'd insist whenever I questioned any suspicious expenses. We're raising awareness. The only thing being raised was my blood pressure. But the real bombshell dropped when I accidentally opened mail addressed to David Parker, property manager. Turns out, my humanitarian husband had been collecting rent from his family members all along, at rates that would make a San Francisco landlord blush, all while I was dipping into my savings to cover our growing expenses. It's going to a good cause, he'd say vaguely when I confronted him. Think of all the people we're helping. I was thinking more about all the ways I could legally remove him from our lease. But that's beside the point. The stress took its toll. Despite the endless bone broth and Aunt Linda's special healing vibrations, I lost the baby at 4 months. I was devastated. David was concerned about how it would affect his image as Silicon Valley's favorite family man. While I was still in the hospital, he actually brought a photographer. For awareness, he said, positioning himself perfectly beside my bed, his face set in what I now recognized as his practiced compassionate expression. The photos appeared on his LinkedIn the next day, with a long post about overcoming adversity and staying strong in the face of life's challenges. It got 10,000 likes and was shared by 3 tech CEOs. My grief? That was less photogenic. Apparently, everyone rallied around David, of course. Poor him, having to deal with such a difficult situation. Poor him, stuck with a wife who couldn't even carry a pregnancy to term. Poor him, still showing up to charity events and giving motivational speeches while his wife was being emotional at home. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind. Was I the unreasonable one? Was I just failing to appreciate my husband's generous spirit? Then I found the spreadsheet. It was buried in a folder labeled Tax Deductions, 2024, and it detailed every charitable act David had performed in the past year, complete with monetary values assigned to each good deed and calculations of their PR value. Even our lost pregnancy had a line item: personal tragedy narrative, potential speaking opportunities. That's when I knew I wasn't losing my mind. I was finally finding it. But before I could act on this revelation, my best friend Olivia dropped her own bombshell into my lap. And trust me, compared to what came next, everything I've told you so far was just the warm-up act. Chapter 3. You know what's worse than discovering your husband is basically running a PR campaign disguised as a life? Finding out your best friend is auditioning for an Oscar using your marriage as her stage. Olivia Kim and I had been friends since our Stanford days, when we bonded over terrible dining hall food, and even worse dating choices. She was the one who helped me debug code at 3 a.m., who held my hair back after too many margaritas, who swore we'd always be there for each other. So when she called me sobbing one random Tuesday, saying she needed to tell me something important, I rushed over to her apartment faster than a Silicon Valley startup burns through venture capital. She paused dramatically, dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief I'd never seen before. 6 months to live. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. What? How? When did you find out? It's very rare, she said vaguely, waving her hand in a way that somehow managed to catch the perfect lighting from her newly installed ring light. The doctors say there's nothing they can do. Being the supportive friend I was, and still emotionally raw from my miscarriage, I didn't question why she wouldn't name the disease, or why she looked healthier than most Silicon Valley wellness influencers. Instead, I asked what I could do to help. Well, she twisted her hands together, looking like a Victorian heroine about to faint onto a convenient chaise lounge. I've always dreamed of having a wedding photoshoot. You know, to leave something beautiful behind. And David, he's so good at helping people. Red flags started waving so hard they could have signaled ships from space. But I was still too wrapped up in grief and guilt to see them clearly. That's how I ended up watching my husband and my best friend pose for wedding photos in my favorite park. David wore the same suit from our wedding, totally different meaning of something borrowed, while Olivia floated around in a dress that probably cost more than her supposed medical bills. It's just pretend, David assured me, giving me that saint-like smile that used to make my heart flutter, but now made me want to check my wallet. We're making a dying woman's wish come true. The photographer, an impossibly handsome man named Jake, who looked more like a K-drama lead than a camera operator, seemed unusually invested in getting the perfect shots. More emotion, he'd call out. David, hold her like you mean it. Olivia, tilt your head exactly 33.5 degrees to catch the golden hour light. But the real kicker, the moment that finally made my last nerve snap like a Silicon Valley startup's promise of work-life balance, walking into our bedroom one day to find Olivia, who had somehow acquired a key to our apartment, carefully hanging a massive framed photo from the shoot above our bed, while David helped her adjust the angle. Don't you think it's a bit much? I asked, trying to keep my voice level. Oh, sweetie, Olivia patted my arm condescendingly, when you're facing death, nothing is too much. David understands that, don't you, David? He nodded sagely, probably already mentally drafting the LinkedIn post about supporting friends through terminal illness. That night, I couldn't sleep. The photo seemed to watch me with mocking eyes. So I did what any rational person would do at 2 a.m. I started Googling. First discovery, Olivia's social media showed her checking in at Method Acting Masterclass every Tuesday for the past 3 months. Second discovery, a blog titled How to Land Your BFF's Husband in 6 Easy Steps written under a pseudonym that was just Olivia's name spelled backward. Third and most damning discovery, Jake the photographer's Instagram, featuring very non-professional photos of him and Olivia on what looked suspiciously like romantic dates, dating back well before her diagnosis. But the real cherry on top of this betrayal Sunday? A video uploaded to TikTok by one of David's charity cases, a behind-the-scenes look at their photoshoot. Hashtag fake wedding, hashtag romance, scam, hashtag perfect con. They weren't just playing me, they were documenting it. As I sat there in the blue light of my laptop, something inside me shifted. The last thread of my patience, already worn tissue paper thin, finally snapped. It was time to stop being the understanding wife, the supportive friend, the perfect Silicon Valley arm candy. It was time to be something else entirely. But first, I needed to make a strategic retreat, and as luck would have it, I had just received an interesting job offer from a luxury hotel chain in Chicago. Little did I know, my escape plan would lead me straight into the arms of someone who had his own score to settle with. David Parker, Silicon Valley's e-sainted scammer. Chapter 4. Here's something they don't teach you in college. When your life implodes, don't walk away, run, preferably to a different time zone. I didn't just leave Silicon Valley, I ghosted it, blocked everyone on social media, changed my phone number, and bought a one-way ticket to Chicago. The only email I sent was my resignation letter to my tech company, which promptly got me 15 concerned LinkedIn messages from David about abandoning my career potential. Meanwhile, my parents were handling my disappearance with their usual subtle Asian parent style, by calling every hour and threatening to file a missing persons report. How could you leave David? My mother wailed during one of her daily voicemails. He's building a school in Guatemala. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. Unless building a school meant setting up a crypto mining operation, and Guatemala meant his basement. But the real gut punch came when I discovered my parents had sold their house, their actual house, to fund David's latest venture. They'd basically adopted him, and disowned me in one impressively efficient move. 28 years of being their perfect daughter, eliminated by 6 months of David's manufactured charm offensive. He's doing God's work, my father insisted when I finally answered one of their calls. And what are you doing? Running away like a coward. I hung up and blocked them too. The job offer that brought me to Chicago was entry-level at the prestigious King Hotel Group. Yes, I went from leading AI ethics initiatives to checking in guests and managing room service complaints. But you know what? It was honest work. No one was pretending to save the world one overpriced latte at a time. That's where I met him. I was 3 months into my new life, rocking a navy blue uniform, and dealing with a particularly entitled guest who was outraged that the fountain in his suite wasn't fountaining the right way. When a voice behind me said, "I believe this gentleman might be more comfortable at the Holiday Inn down the street," I turned around and nearly dropped my tablet. The man standing there was straight out of a GQ cover, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my annual salary, with a kind of presence that made everyone else in the room feel like background characters. "Mr. King." The angry guest suddenly transformed into a nodding bobblehead. "I didn't. I mean, the fountain is fine." And just like that, the guest scurried away. "Marcus King," he introduced himself, extending a hand. "And you must be Julia Chen. Your handling of the Singapore delegation last week was impressive." I shook his hand, trying not to show my surprise that the CEO of King Hotel Group knew my name. "Thank you, sir. I just followed protocol." He smiled, and something in that smile reminded me of a chess player seeing several moves ahead. Protocol wouldn't have known to order durian-flavored bubble tea for their breakfast meeting. "You did your research." I shrugged. "I like to be thorough." "So I've heard. Stanford AI ethics program, top of your class, 3 published papers on predictive behavior algorithms." His eyes held mine. "Quite a shift from Silicon Valley to hospitality. Sometimes a change of scenery is good for the soul, especially when the scenery includes a fraudulent husband and a fake dying best friend." I froze. "You've done your research too, David Parker?" "And I have." "History?" His expression darkened slightly. "Let's just say your ex-husband's talent for manipulation didn't start with you." And that's how I found myself having dinner with Marcus King in his penthouse office, trading stories about David Parker's greatest hits of deception. Turns out, back in their Stanford days, David had stolen Marcus's business idea, girlfriend, and senior thesis, in that order. He presented my work on ethical investment algorithms as his own, Marcus explained, pouring me another glass of wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent. By the time I could prove it was mine, he'd already landed major VC funding and a Time magazine cover. Let me guess, the story was about young entrepreneurs changing the world. Close. The new face of philanthropic innovation. The irony was particularly bitter. I laughed. But it wasn't really funny. He does love his innovation, almost as much as he loves his photo ops. Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense. "What if I told you there's a way to expose him, not just to a few people, but to everyone?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "Your AI expertise, combined with my resources." He smiled, the chess player smile again. "We could create something beautiful. And by beautiful, I mean absolutely devastating to David Parker's carefully constructed house of cards." That's when I realized, this wasn't just a chance meeting. Marcus King had been watching, waiting, planning. And now he was offering me a front row seat to the most elaborate revenge plot Silicon Valley had ever seen. I should have been scared. I should have walked away. Instead, I raised my glass. "When do we start?" What I didn't know then was that Marcus King's plan was even more intricate than I imagined, and that my role in it had been choreographed long before I stepped foot in his hotel. But hey, they say revenge is a dish best served cold, and in Chicago, everything was about to get very, very cold indeed. Chapter 5. They say karma comes after you like a truck, but sometimes, karma needs a little help from a billionaire hotel magnate and an ex-wife with programming skills. 6 months into my new life in Chicago, Marcus and I had orchestrated what I can only describe as Ocean's 11 meets Silicon Valley if Ocean's 11 was about exposing tech bros instead of robbing casinos. The plan was simple: host a major tech conference at the King Hotel Chicago, with David Parker as the keynote speaker. Theme? Authentic innovation in the digital age. Oh, the irony. Getting David to accept was embarrassingly easy. One mention of Time magazine wanting to do a follow-up piece, and he practically teleported to Chicago. What he didn't know was that every journalist at the conference worked for Marcus. Every tech enthusiast was a carefully placed actor, even the barista who served him his morning oat milk latte, because of course that's what he ordered, was part of our plan. I watched from the hotel's security room as David strutted through our lobby, Olivia trailing behind him like a designer-clad shadow. She'd traded her terminal illness for a miraculous recovery story, which she was now selling to wellness blogs. Very on brand for Silicon Valley. "Mr. Parker," our planted reporter approached him. "Is it true you're launching a new charitable initiative?" David's face lit up like a Bitcoin investor in 2021. "Actually, yes. We're developing an AI-driven platform to help allocate resources to those most in need. I snorted. The AI platform he was talking about? It was my old project, the one I'd left behind in Silicon Valley. Except he'd removed all the ethical constraints I'd built into it. Show time, Marcus murmured behind me, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. On cue, every screen in the hotel lobby lit up with a video presentation. But instead of David's carefully prepared keynote, it showed a comprehensive breakdown of his charitable activities over the past 5 years. The mysterious disappearing donations, the fake nonprofits, the tax evasion schemes disguised as community outreach. David's face went from Silicon Valley tan to ghost white in approximately 2.3 seconds. But wait, there's more. Remember those security cameras in our old apartment? Turns out they'd captured some very interesting conversations between David and Olivia, planning their little photoshoot scam, including the part where they laughed about how gullible I was. Are you recording this? David sputtered, looking around wildly as real journalists, who'd been tipped off, started streaming in. Whoa, honey, I said, finally stepping out of the shadows. We're live streaming? His eyes nearly popped out of his head. Julia? But, you're a waitress. I smiled sweetly. Actually, I'm the assistant director of digital operations for King Hotel Group. I held up my hand, where a rather impressive engagement ring caught the light. And future Mrs. King. This is where Olivia, proving that her acting classes weren't entirely wasted, chose to have her dramatic moment. You're marrying Marcus King? She shrieked, her designer handbag falling to the floor. But what about our love story? Your love story? I raised an eyebrow. You mean the one you've been documenting on your secret blog? The one where you detailed your master plan to steal my husband? That love story. The lobby had become so quiet you could hear a startup bubble pop. David, ever the opportunist, tried one last time. Julia, please. I can explain everything. Look. I even brought you something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a bag of park nuts, the same ones he used to feed to squirrels during his charitable photo ops. I stared at the nuts, then at him, then back at the nuts. Are these even organic? That's when the SEC agents walked in. Turns out, Marcus hadn't just been collecting evidence of David's personal deceits. He'd been building a case about the financial ones too. All those charitable donations? They were being funneled through a complex network of shell companies, right back into David's pocket. Those amazing nonprofits he kept talking about? Most of them existed only on paper. David Parker, one of the agents, announced, "You're under investigation for tax fraud, wire fraud, and misappropriation of charitable funds." As they led him away, David kept yelling about his vision for a better world, and how nobody understands the burden of being a humanitarian innovator. Olivia, showing an impressive commitment to her role, fainted dramatically, right into the arms of Jake the photographer, who'd been documenting the whole thing. At least they'd get some good pictures out of it. Later that evening, as Marcus and I watched the sunset from his penthouse office, he turned to me with the chess player smile I'd grown to love. You know, he said, most people would have just written an angry blog post. I clinked my champagne glass against his. Most people don't have a billionaire fiancé, with a grudge and access to hotel security systems. But the best part, this wasn't even the end of the story. Because sometimes, revenge isn't just a dish best served cold. It's a whole frozen feast with multiple courses. And dessert? Well, dessert was going to be delicious. Chapter 6. Here's a pro tip. When planning your revenge wedding, always spring for the extra security. Trust me, it's worth it. The King Hotel's grand ballroom looked like it had been touched by Midas himself. All gold and crystal and enough flowers to make the Chicago Botanic Garden jealous. Marcus had insisted on sparing no expense, which meant everything from the champagne to the table settings could have funded a small tech startup. Ready? Marcus asked, adjusting his bow tie as we prepared for our entrance. I smoothed down my custom Vera Wang dress, white with subtle gold threading that caught the light just so. Born ready. That's when my assistant's voice crackled through my earpiece. Mrs. Almost King? We have a situation at the west entrance. Because of course we did. My parents had arrived, uninvited and armed with what looked like a PowerPoint presentation titled Why Julia is Making the Biggest Mistake of Her Life, with statistical analysis. Very on brand for two retired professors. Sweetheart, my mother called out as I approached them. We've prepared a comprehensive document outlining why David deserves a second chance. I smiled, channeling my inner Marcus King negotiator mode. And I've prepared a comprehensive prenuptial agreement that includes a clause about your retirement fund. They froze. You see, I continued sweetly, Marcus discovered some interesting details about Dad's gambling debts, The ones David was using to blackmail you. We've taken care of them. All of them. But if you tried to stop this wedding, well, I shrugged. I hear Florida is lovely for retirees on a budget. My father's jaw dropped. You wouldn't. Try me. 10 minutes later, they were seated quietly in the front row, wearing their We Love Marcus pins without further complaint. But because the universe has a sense of humor, and our private investigator had excellent timing, that's when the real show began. The doors burst open, and in walked not one, not two, but 5 women, all clutching identical charity project proposals from David, all wearing identical shocked expressions as they realized they weren't the only ones he'd been helping. He said I was special, wailed a blonde in Chanel. He promised to fund my eco-friendly yoga studio, sobbed another in Gucci. He was going to help me launch my blockchain for puppies, cried a third. I grabbed the microphone from the DJ booth. Ladies, please join us. In fact, why don't you all share your David Parker stories? We're recording this for a Netflix documentary called When Saints Become Sinners. Your trauma could help others. Marcus shot me a look that was half pride, half amusement. This particular plot twist hadn't been part of our plan, but hey, when life gives you lemons, make content. Just as the ceremony was about to begin, one final guest made her grand entrance. Olivia, wearing a white dress, because of course she was, burst through the doors clutching her stomach. Stop the wedding, she screamed. I'm pregnant with David's baby. The room went silent. Then I started laughing. Whoa, honey, I said, taking out my phone. Is this the pregnancy you faked for your lifestyle blog last month? Or the one you claim to have in your deleted Instagram drafts? I projected her private social media calendar onto the giant screen behind us, because according to this, you're scheduled to have a miscarriage next week, right before your sponsored post for fertility tea. She deflated faster than a tech bubble in a recession. But I wasn't done. Also, fun fact, remember all those times you and David were planning your future in our apartment? The security camera footage didn't just catch your scam. It caught you admitting you can't have children due to that experimental surgery you had in Korea. The one you got to look more like your Instagram filters? Jake the photographer chose that moment to step forward. Is that why you said we should wait a few years before trying? Olivia's face went through more transitions than a failed startup's business model. Marcus cleared his throat. Should we proceed with the ceremony? I looked around the room, at my chastened parents, the group of David's charity cases now bonding over their shared experiences, Olivia being consoled by Jake, who was still taking photos, bless him, and the Netflix crew capturing it all. Actually, I said, I have one more announcement. Marcus raised an eyebrow. This wasn't in our script. Remember that AI ethics project I was working on before all this started? The one David stole? I grinned. Well, while everyone was focused on the fraud investigation, I've been quietly building something new. Marcus? He pulled out his phone and nodded. On cue, every screen in the ballroom lit up with the launch of my new company, an AI-driven platform for detecting charity fraud and investment scams. Our first case study? David Parker. Also, I added, resting a hand on my stomach. We're having twins. Marcus, for the first time since I'd known him, looked genuinely surprised. Twins? I was waiting for the perfect dramatic moment to tell you. I winked. I learned from the best, after all. As Marcus pulled me in for a kiss that definitely wasn't in the ceremony script, I couldn't help but think, sometimes the best revenge isn't just exposing the truth, it's building something better from the lies. And as for David, last I heard, he's writing a self-help book from his minimum security prison cell. The title? From Hero to Zero, a Silicon Valley cautionary tale. I hear it's not selling well, but we are living well. And isn't that the best revenge of all? The end.